Learn English through story. The dark desires of the heart. In a quiet village nestled in a valley surrounded by towering mountains, there lived a man named Gregor. The village of Eldermere was simple, its people content with the rhythmic, predictable pace of life. Fields of golden wheat stretched out as far as the eye could see, and the people were close-knit, bound by their shared experiences and histories. Yet beneath the idyllic surface, a simmering truth pulsed through the heart of the village, waiting to be unearthed. Gregor had always been an outsider. While he was born in Eldermore, he did not share the same easy contentment that seemed to define his fellow villagers. From an early age, Gregor had been consumed by desiring not the ordinary desires for wealth or status, but something deeper, something darker. It was a hunger for power, control, and influence, and over time, this desire grew like a festering wound inside him. As Gregor grew older, he became more withdrawn. While his peers spent their days working the fields, laughing together, and embracing the simple pleasures of life, Gregor remained aloof, spending most of his time in his modest home at the edge of the village. There, he pored over ancient texts he had collected from passing traders, scrolls and books filled with forgotten lore, arcane knowledge, and the whispers of powers beyond human comprehension. One evening, while studying one of his oldest texts, Gregor stumbled upon a passage that sent shivers down his spine. It spoke of an artifact, an ancient relic known as the Heartstone, hidden deep within the mountains. The Heartstone, the text claimed, could grant unimaginable power to its possessor but at a cost. The relic fed on the desires of the heart, amplifying them beyond control, turning one's deepest longings into their darkest obsessions. For a moment, Gregor hesitated. He knew the risks, knew that those who sought the Heartstone rarely returned, and those who did were never the same. But the promise of power, the allure of finally satisfying the desires that had tormented him for so long, was too great to resist. With newfound determination, Gregor packed his belongings, gathered what provisions he could, and set out for the mountains the next morning. The journey was perilous. The mountain paths were treacherous, and as Gregor ascended, the weather turned against him. Frigid winds howled through the valleys, and thick snow blanketed the ground. But Gregor pressed on, driven by a singular obsession. Days passed, and exhaustion clawed at his mind and body, but finally, after what felt like an eternity, Gregor found the entrance to the cave that housed the Heartstone. The cave was unlike anything Gregor had ever seen. Its walls were adorned with strange symbols, glowing faintly with an otherworldly light. The air inside was heavy, almost suffocating, and a low, resonant hum filled the space, vibrating in Gregor's bones. At the center of the cave, resting on a pedestal of black stone, was the Heartstone. The relic was beautiful, larger than a man's fist. It glowed with a soft, pulsating light, as though it had a heartbeat of its own. Gregor's hands trembled as he approached it. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to turn back, to leave this place, but the dark desire that had brought him here whispered louder. With a trembling hand, Gregor reached out and touched the stone. The moment his fingers brushed its surface, a surge of power rushed through him, overwhelming his senses. His vision blurred, his heart raced, and for a brief moment, it felt as though the universe itself had opened up to him. He could feel the raw energy of the Heartstone coursing through his veins, filling him with a sense of invincibility. a feeling of limitless potential. But then, something else began to take hold. At first, it was subtly a whisper in the back of his mind, a faint echo of his deepest desires. But the whispers grew louder, more insistent, until they were deafening. Gregor's mind was flooded with images of visions of power, of domination, of ruling over not just the village, but the entire world. His heart swelled with greed, with lust for control, and as the stone fed on these desires, they twisted and grew, becoming something monstrous. He wanted more power, more control, more of everything. The heart stone had unlocked something within him, something he had always kept hidden, even from himself. The darkness that had always lurked in the corners of his heart was now fully unleashed, and there was no turning back. Gregor left the cave a changed man. The villagers of Eldermere immediately noticed the difference. His eyes, once cold and distant, now burned with an intensity that made those who looked into them uneasy. His presence commanded attention, and soon, the villagers began to follow his lead, though they did not know why. It was as though Gregor had gained a supernatural charisma, an aura of authority that compelled obedience. At first, Gregor used his newfound power to improve the village. He organized the people, increased productivity, and soon, Eldermere flourished in ways it never had before. Crops grew larger, the village prospered, and Gregor was hailed as a savior. But it wasn't enough. The more power Gregor wielded, the more he craved. Soon, Gregor's demands became unreasonable. He enforced harsh laws, punishing those who disobeyed with a cruelty that shocked even his most loyal followers. He levied heavy taxes, amassing wealth for himself, and those who questioned him were silenced. The village, once a place of peace and community, became a place of fear and oppression. But Gregor did not care. His desires had consumed him, and all that mattered now was feeding the hunger that burned within him. As Gregor's tyranny grew, so too did the darkness within him. The Heartstone, now embedded in a medallion he wore around his neck, whispered constantly, urging him to take more, to dominate, to crush those beneath him, and Gregor obeyed. One night, as Gregor stood alone in his home, staring at his reflection in a mirror, he barely recognized the man he had become. His once youthful face was now gaunt, his eyes sunken and hollow. His skin had taken on a sickly pallor, and the veins beneath his skin pulsed with the same merry light as the Heartstone. But even as he gazed at the monstrous figure before him, he felt no remorse, no regret, only a deep, insatiable hunger for more. Yet as the darkness within Gregor grew, so too did the consequences of his actions. The village, once thriving, began to wither. The crops that had grown so plentifully now shriveled and died. The people, once united under Gregor's rule, now lived in fear and despair. Famine and disease spread, and the village began to crumble. Still, Gregor refused to relent. He could feel the power of the Heartstone waning, and he knew that if he did not act soon, he would lose everything. Desperation clawed at him, and he became more ruthless, more violent, lashing out at anyone who dared to defy him. But there was one thing Gregor had not accounted for: the human spirit. The villagers, though beaten and broken, had not lost their will to survive. In secret, they began to plot against him, gathering in the shadows to discuss how they might free themselves from his tyranny. And at the center of their resistance was a young woman named Alara. Alara had known Gregor before he had found the Heartstone. She had grown up with him, seen the quiet boy he had once been, and though she had watched in horror as he transformed into a monster, she still believed there was a part of him that could be saved. But as the darkness consumed him, Alara knew that Gregor could not be reasoned with. The only way to free the village from his grip was to destroy the Heartstone. One night, as the village lay in ruins and the people on the brink of revolt, Alara snuck into Gregor's home. She found him standing before the mirror, his eyes fixed on the glowing stone around his neck. He did not notice her at first, so lost was he in his own reflection, in the power that still coursed through him. With trembling hands, Alara approached him. "Gregor," she whispered, her voice breaking the silence. "This isn't you." He turned to her, his eyes filled with madness. "I am everything I was meant to be," he snarled. "You cannot understand the power I wield." "I don't want to understand," Alara said softly. "But I know this power is destroying you." Gregor laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. "Destroying me? No, Alara. It has made me more than I ever was. The village, the people, they were nothing. Now they are mine to control." Tears filled Alara's eyes as she reached for the Heartstone. "It's the stone, Gregor. It's twisted your desires. You need to let it go." But Gregor recoiled from her touch, his face contorted with rage. "You cannot take this from me," he hissed. "I am the master of this village, of this world." In that moment, Alara knew there was no reasoning with him. With a surge of courage, she lunged forward, grabbing the Heartstone. A violent shockwave rippled through the room as Gregor screamed in agony. The stone's light flared brightly, then began to fade. Alara held tight, even as the power surged through her, burning her skin. And then, with one final burst of energy, the Heartstone shattered. Gregor fell to the ground, the darkness draining from his body. His eyes cleared, and for the first time in years, he saw Alara not as an enemy, but as a friend. But it was too late. The man he had once been was gone, consumed by the dark desires that had ruled his heart. The village was free, but the cost had been great. And as the villagers began to rebuild, they knew that the darkness of desire was a force that, once unleashed, could never truly be controlled. The unchecked desires of the heart can lead to destruction, both of oneself and those around. True power lies not in domination or control, but in understanding and tempering one's deepest longings, lest they consume the soul. I hope you enjoyed the story. If you enjoyed, then please like and share this video, and don't forget to subscribe our YouTube channel. Thank you for watching.